There is a gamble that T20 teams make all the time because there just aren't that many all-rounders around.
This is the last knock. When was the first knock? Don't know.
And in franchise cricket, sometimes it shows bad planning or just bad luck that you can't get one. And you might find someone who can't bowl at all bowling your fifth overs, or you might have someone at number 7 who can't bat really that much and is getting a bit of a nosebleed from being up that high. Hello to Jai Richardson and Chris Jordan from the Punjab Kings, if they're watching. For a franchise, of course, it's something you can fix by finding maybe an overseas player or at the next mega auction. If you're an international team and you don't make all-rounders, that's a far bigger problem. And Australia has dominated cricket for a very, very long time. And yet, the one thing that they've never really produced since Keith Miller, Richie Benaud, wherever you want to put the cutoff, is just genuine all-rounders. In fact, I've done a whole video about Australia and their lack of all-rounders. And the weird thing is that even though Australia dominated one-day cricket for so long, they still did it really without great all-round options. They sort of cheated their fifth bowler more often than not. One of my favourite cases was Darren Lehmann bowling left-arm doorknobs, just getting away with it. 5 overs a game, and people just accepting that because in those days you would knock the ball around. And it's not just Australia. West Indies were the best one-day side before them, and they had Viv Richards bowling a lot of their overs, who, despite not being a very good off-spinner, no one actually hit, probably because he was Viv Richards and he got away with it a little bit. But in one-day cricket and T20 cricket now, that sort of gentleman's agreement that you hit the ball out to the sweepers for a few overs in the middle, the boring middle overs as we've often called them, doesn't really exist that much, especially in T20 cricket. So cheating on your fifth bowler is harder now than it has ever been in cricket because teams will just take on that matchup. If they know you have a weak fifth bowler or a weak fifth and sixth bowler, they will just go after them. And quite often that doesn't mean that your fifth bowler just goes for a lot of runs, because there might be a bunch of different reasons you get away with it. You might have a leg spinner in your team and you're going up against a bunch of right-handers, or you might have a good slow ball bowler who can't bowl that often, but on a pitch where there's a little bit of purchase is quite handy, and you get away with those overs. Not to mention that if you're picking your best 4 frontline bowlers around them, they might put your fifth bowler in a very good position in some games. In that case, your fifth bowler is only coming on when you're already ahead of the game. And so that makes a lot of sense. And so you can see why a team like Australia, who really can't find a genuine all-rounder, is just like, we'll just pick our best 4 bowlers and hope that covers the fifth bowler, and that means we have genuine 7 batters. Because of course the payoff here is, sometimes when you do pick 5 bowlers, that means you don't have 7 batters. And that is what Australia are doing. They have a 5th and 6th bowler in Glenn Maxwell or Marcus Stoinis, and they will bat all the way down to number 7. No one would choose this option. This is an option you do when you have no other choices. And people will say, well, surely Australia has some sort of all-round options in their team. Well, there are players with all-round skill in their side. Ashton Agar is one of the first ones you're thinking of, probably because he's also like alphabetically right at the top of the list. And he is an all-rounder in some levels of T20 cricket. His bowling over the last couple of years has been really good, and he's obviously a very good fielder and an athlete as well. His batting gets talked up more than anyone else's batting I've ever seen when someone just doesn't make a lot of runs. He's never really made a lot of runs, and yet he's quite often used as a batter by Australia and other teams. I mean, he has a career strike rate of 114 in T20 cricket. This year he's averaging 6.7, and if you compare him to other number 7s in all T20 cricket, not just internationals, he just is like a long way behind what you want a number 7 to be. So if Australia does pick him, they're basically going in with 6 batters. Now a few of you will be thinking of Pat Cummins, because you've probably seen him bat once or twice and thought to yourself, do you know what, he's quite organised, he knows what he's doing. Pat Cummins actually has batted at number 7 a few times in his life. Weirdly, I think I've been at a few of these games, and he's even had success on occasion. But in 13 innings at number 7, he averages 17 with a strike rate of 123. He's at his absolute best when he's batting at number 8. And there's a really good reason for this. Pat Cummins is a really good hitter of fast bowling. He likes it a lot. He hits it very far, and it doesn't get him out that often. Pat Cummins scores at less than a run a ball against spin in T20 cricket. That's a thing that happens. So when people say, oh, he can bat at number 7, not if they lose any wickets, he can't. He's a very good player to come in the last 2 or 3 overs when it's definitely going to be seam bowling. But if that's not the case, he's going to struggle. Mitchell Marsh obviously started his career as a genuine all-rounder. In T20 cricket, maybe less so. But as the years have gone on, Mitchell Marsh has just bowled less and less. He's no longer even close to an all-rounder in T20 cricket. He hasn't bowled in either of Australia's games here. So, I mean, he's an all-rounder in that he can physically bowl, but he's not an all-rounder in any other sense of the word. Less than 1 over a game is barely part-time. Now, if Glenn Maxwell is your cup of tea, then I can get that. He actually has pretty good bowling figures, but there's a reason for that. He just doesn't bowl that much. He's usually bowled when the conditions are in his favour. There's a lot to like about Glenn Maxwell. I think he's an ideal 6th bowler. Essentially, he's very confident. He doesn't mind bowling against right-handers. He's quite clever tactically, and he understands T20 hitting very, very well. But you're not going to get 4 overs a game out of him. It's just not something that they're ever going to be able to do. I'm only putting this in because someone will probably mention mentioned this in the comments, Mitchell Starc. He averages 10 in T20 cricket with a strike rate of 92. Now, you've probably seen him hitting 4s and 6s before, and you've thought to yourself, no, he's a better player than that. He averages 20 in Test cricket. He is a good hitter in Test cricket, but unless he's used as a pinch hitter, which to be fair, Australia could certainly use him against leg spin because he smashes that everywhere, I just can't see how his batting is of any help to the Australian team at all, outside of like a last over 6 that he might hit on occasion. So if you've ever said that Mitchell Starc is an all-rounder, take that out of your mouth right now. Marcus Stoinis is a really clever cricketer. I love the way he plays. I love the way he thinks through stuff. He's obviously very strong. He's got a fast arm for his bowling action, a very good surprise bouncer, and for a part-timer, he's willing to bowl at the death. But he is in no way a fifth bowler. And if we're being really honest, he's in the absolute worst bowling form of his life. And that's probably because he's bowled so much, people have kind of worked out that outside of a nice bouncer and occasional decent off-cutter, there's not that much to his bowling. He's not that fast. He doesn't move it that much. He's not always that accurate. You can wait for the bad balls with him on some occasions. He will slip through the odd over, but probably more of a part-timer. And so it's the combination of Glenn Maxwell when everything is in his favour and Marcus Stoinis when apparently Glenn Maxwell is getting hit around that Australia is going to go with in this tournament. And it makes sense as much as these things do. When I did a Q&A earlier today, someone asked about Cameron Green. Well, Cameron Green's bowled like 2 overs in T20 cricket and barely played any games as a batter as well. Like, he's a long way off. There's obviously 2 backup players in the squad, Dan Christian and Daniel Sams. Look, Dan Christian, Australia have had like a million chances to play Dan Christian. I think he first played a T20 game over 10 years ago and he's played 23 for Australia since. Like, if they really ever thought he was the right player, they had plenty of time to get him in the side. They don't. He's not in the squad. And Daniel Sams is a really confusing player. He's a brilliant hitter of the ball and he can bowl incredible cutters, but sometimes he doesn't look like he's anywhere near good enough. And whether he will be at international cricket, I sincerely doubt. I'm not sure he's a good enough batter or bowler at the international level. And so, Maxwell and Stoinis, right? They might try Agar at one stage. Maybe Mitchell Marsh, if he stays in the team, will bowl some extra overs. If they're really desperate, Pat Cummins might bat at 7, especially if their top order's doing really well. You hear a lot of analysts say that it doesn't really matter who bats at number 7 because they don't face that many balls a game. That is completely true. Except for the fact that when you talk to top order players, they almost always slow down when they see a very weak player batting at number 7. It affects how the rest of the batting works, not so much the number 7 themselves. And there are going to be games where Pat Cummins will come off at 7. So they may take that risk, bring in an extra bowler. It's possible. Or they may just keep backing Maxwell and Stoinis and hope it works. And in the first game against South Africa, it did kind of work okay, didn't it? Obviously, South Africa didn't play particularly well. They didn't bat well. It was a weird old wicket, but the wicket suited Maxwell. He bowled well. He had a lot of good matchups. The rest of the Australian bowlers were bowling quite well, and Maxwell did very, very well. Australia won that game. Against Sri Lanka, Australia won that game as well. But the Maxwell-Stoinis overs did not work. Maxwell's first over got absolutely smashed, despite going up against a couple of left-handers. Stoinis had 1 good over, and then 2 very poor overs, and realistically, his figures kind of flattered him a little bit by the end. And it didn't matter because the other 4 Australian bowlers bowled so well, and that's kind of part of the gamble, isn't it? The problem is on the day when Zampa doesn't bowl that well, or Hazelwood gets met, Cummins goes for runs. But so far the gamble has worked once and not worked once, but they've won both the games. But partly that's probably because they've won the toss and they've batted at the right time and due and all those sorts of things that has helped them win those games. To win this tournament, you really need to win minimum of 5 of your 7 games, maybe 6 of your 7 games. And certainly, obviously, the last 2 are quite important in that case. How many times will this gamble need to come off for Australia? It's already failed once and they still won the game. Maybe the bigger challenge will be when they're losing the toss and, you know, having to go up against it and someone like Maxwell or Stoinis is having to bowl with the dew on the ball with set batters in a chase. Maybe that will change things. And maybe just when they get to the finals and they're playing the best teams and those teams will completely attack them the way that Sri Lanka did today, but without collapsing at the end. Australia's going to back their 4 bowlers to be good enough that their 5th bowler doesn't matter. And they're hoping their number 7 being stronger will allow their batters to attack more, score more, feel more confident. This isn't new for Australia. This is the gamble that Australia's been taking into tournaments pretty much since Shane Watson stopped being able to bowl for them. Most tournaments, they're really reliant on Finch and Warner and Mitchell Starc. They know every single time they come in that their team is not structured correctly. Aaron Finch said something really interesting to Mark Nicholas before the game. He said that pound for pound, Australia still thought they had the best 11 players, or at least as good 11 players as anyone else at this tournament. It's probably true. They just don't have the structure that some of the other teams have. Whether that matters or not, probably depends on what kind of a tournament Mitchell Starc, David Warner and Aaron Finch have.